Hi, I'm Dave Underwood with DFW Guitars, and this will be my first instructional video for YouTube, hopefully to be followed by a few more. Let me start by saying I've been doing guitar repair for over 30 years, so this comes pretty easy to me. If you have never done guitar repair before, if you're a little familiar with it, I do caution you to not just jump into this. I'm going to try to walk you through it as best I can. But especially when it comes to soldering, it's not rocket science. It's actually pretty easy, but there's a lot of technique involved, just like playing guitar. So if you can find a friend who's familiar with soldering, who's done it before, or a guy like me in your local area that does guitar repair, that can maybe help you along the way to get started, that's a good idea. I strongly urge you not to try to start soldering on your own guitar, because there's a lot of things that can go wrong. First of all, you can really screw up your guitar. Second of all, you can hurt yourself. These soldering irons heat up to over 500 degrees. And trust me, if this touches your finger, it's going to leave a mark. So let's start over here. We have, I prefer the Weller soldering iron. I've been letting it warm up for several minutes. Always have a wet sponge, very wet, not soaking wet, but good wet sponge to clean your tip with. You always want to clean your tip every time you finish doing a solder joint. The tips are replaceable, but if you keep the tips clean, they'll last a lot longer than if you don't. And it'll also make working with the solder a lot easier. You don't want a dirty tip. Okay, this is a solder sucker, a very good tool to have. Basically, you push the plunger down, and when you pull up on it, it creates a suction which pulls old solder off of the joint that you're going to be working on. These little plastic bins are what new pickups come in. I use these a lot. I cut down a sponge to put it inside this one to keep it there. I also use them for parts trays. You don't want a bunch of loose parts laying all over your workbench. Here's another thing. You want your workbench to be nice and soft. You don't want anything to scratch the guitar's finish when you're moving it around and working on it. A nice soft material on top. Carpet's fine. I was lucky to have this one custom made for me by my good friend. And you want to keep this clean. I always, after every job, I blow it off with the air compressor, or I use a shop vac to suction all the little loose pieces of wood or metal that could be on there that could scratch the guitar's surface. Now, what I'm going to do today is a pretty basic job. I'm going to do a pickup swap out. This customer brought me two Mexican-made Stratocasters. These are called Fat Strats. And the reason is because instead of 3 single coils, like you would see on most Stratocasters, this has 2 single coils and a humbucker, which makes this a really good, versatile guitar. Single coils tend to have a trebly, higher, thinner sound, and the humbucker has a deeper, darker, fatter sound. So that's why it's called a Fat Strat. So with your pickup selector, you can go from a regular Strat sound down to a humbucker sound, which is what you find in like most Gibson guitars and a lot of other guitars that have humbuckers in them. This particular customer has 2 Mexican-made Fat Strats. This one being an 07 model, that one is an 03 model. And this one has a DiMarzio pickup that has been put in by someone else down the road. And he's not real happy with the sound of this one, but he loves the way it plays. It's got a thinner neck profile. It's very comfortable for him to play. This newer one he bought has a little bit of a fatter neck, but it has a Seymour Duncan in it, which he really likes the sound of this pickup better than that one. So what I'm going to be doing is basically just a swap. I'm going to take the Seymour Duncan pickup, put it in this one, and take the DiMarzio out, put it in this one. So to save time, I've already taken the strings off the guitar and I've removed all of the pickup screws which hold the pick guard screws which hold the pick guard in place. And very carefully you lift this out twist it this way and turn it over, and all your electronics are exposed now. Okay, now Seymour Duncan and DiMarzio both have 4 to 5 wires, not just 1 or 2. Sometimes you see a ground and a hot, but with these more modern pickups, a lot of times they have 4 to 5 wires, so you can do coil tapping, coil splitting, things like that. So the first thing I'm going to have to do is take this pickup out so I can replace it with the Seymour Duncan. Okay, so cut. If I tap you right there, it means it's cut. Okay, now we're going to desolder the DiMarzio pickup. And this is the main wire coming off the DiMarzio pickup. We see we have a green wire and a bare wire, which are both ground wires. They're grounded to the volume pot. There's a red wire which goes to the 5-way switch, and a black and white wire which both go to the 5-way switch as well. So very simply, we're just going to take these wires off. Now, again, if you haven't soldered before, I strongly urge that you get a pair of these. These are just basic gardening gloves, believe it or not, but they're rubber. So this will help you from burning your hands. Okay, they're lightweight, they're thin, so they're still easy to work with. They're not bulky. And what I've done on this, because I'm right-handed, I've cut the fingertips out of the forefinger and thumb, because if you need to grab a screw or a small part, you can't really do it with the rubber. This is a little trick I learned from the Fender Custom Shop. Now, since I've done this many times, I'm not going to use these. But again, if you're a beginner, please go to Ace Hardware or whatever hardware store, get a pair of these for $2 or $3 and use them so you're comfortable with it. Always start out cleaning your tip. We're going to go right in here. We're going to start with this red wire here and hold the tip of the soldering iron. And what you'll see, as soon as the metal gets hot, you'll see that it begins to flow. That's what we call flow, when the metal is molten and it's moving around. Now you see I got a little bit of excess wire sticking in there. I'm going to pull that out. That's also what a solder sucker is good for. Get it ready to go. Heat that solder back up again. I got most of it out. There's a little bit left on the tip. I just clean it here on my sponge and that's gone. Now we still have a nice clean lead here if I want to rewire that with the other pickup. So again, we're going to go back in here, try to get my hands out of the way. We've got a black and white wire here. Again, we're just touching it. You're heating the metal, and it just released, just like that. That easy. Go back with the solder sucker. Heat it again until it flows. You see the color change? You'll notice, see how it's kind of a hazy color now? And when I get it melted, it's a shiny color. And you'll notice every time I do any maneuver, I go back and clean the soldering tip. So those two are out. Now all we got to do is remove these ground wires here on the ground pot. Now you'll see the guy, whoever did this before, wasn't the greatest. He used huge globs of solder here, so that's okay. We can do one or two things. I could just cut those off. In this case, because there's all these ground wires here, I think that's what I'm doing. I'm going to go ahead and cut that one off. But over here, this one's not quite as big of a glob of solder. Because it's attached to the back of the pot, I'm having to heat a lot of metal there. Okay, that one came off pretty easy. But what I'm afraid of is this large glob of solder here not only has this ground wire, but all these ground wires attached to it. So I'm just going to cut that off. It's not a problem. There's still plenty of wire there to work with. Let's take some good sharp wire cutters. Get right in there, close as possible, and nip that off. Now all the wires are free from that pickup. Now we're going to go ahead and remove the pickup from the pick guard. This is how all strats are. Everything's mounted to the pick guard. Just these two screws right here. Falls right out. There should be a spring on the bottom of each one. In this case, the spring stuck down here. That'll happen a lot of times because this is magnetic, so the springs tend to stick to it. Go ahead and take these old screws out because they may not be the same size as the new pickup I'm putting in. So there, that's the removal of one pickup. And this video is going to be great for you if you're just installing a new pickup in your guitar, not necessarily doing a swap out like I'm doing today. So that's done. And again, when you remove the pick guard, be very careful. Don't pull up real hard, and gently twist and pull around so you're not ripping any wires out that you're going to have to go back and resolder later. Okay, so that's ready for an install of a new pickup, which I'm going to have to take out of the white one now. It's very, I'm kind of anal about this. Be very organized in your workspace. Again, I have a tray here with all the pick guard screws from this one, so parts aren't going flying anywhere and getting lost. So now, what I got to do, since my soldering station is over here, is take this guitar here, put this guitar down here where my soldering station is. By the way, this soldering station is something you absolutely must have if you're going to do soldering. You can get them at Radio Shack, Fry's, several different places. It's got the spring coil here to hold your soldering gun when you're not using it. You don't want to lay it on here because it'll burn. It'll burn up this fabric. Right there, it's safe. And it's not going to burn anything. It also has these what we call helping hands. A lot of times if you're, say, soldering in a new pot or something, these two little alligator clips will hold the wires in place because soldering requires two hands. And if you've got two wires coming in and then you got a solder in one hand and your iron in the other hand, you're trying to do four things at once, it just won't work. So these little alligator clips can hold the wires right where you want them to be, so you can get your solder point right there. Absolutely necessary, as well as the wet sponge. So now we're on the white one with the Seymour Duncan. And again, I've already removed the strings and the screws, so I'm just going to flip this over. Now we'll see here. See better if where do I put my glasses? Over there. I'll be 48 in 2 days, so the eyes aren't as what they used to be. So yeah, somebody's gone in here and installed this Seymour Duncan, used a lot of electrical tape. That's okay. A lot of times it's hard to find the end. So this is where your X-Acto knife comes in handy. Just try not to cut the shielding on the wires. Just cut the tape off. Make it a little easier to work with. And make sure you don't cut yourself. X-Acto blades are even sharper than a razor blade, so be very careful when you're working with them. Safety is #1 priority. Okay, pretty much the same thing here. Seymour Duncan, a more modern Seymour Duncan, doesn't have just a hot in the ground. It's got 4 or 5 wires. On a typical Seymour Duncan, the red and the white, just if you're not doing coil tapping or anything like that, in and out of phase, you just solder those two together, which this guy did correctly, and tape them off. And then green and bare are ground, and black is hot. Whereas with the DiMarzio, red is hot, and this kind of drives me crazy. I wish all the pickup manufacturers would get on the same page, but of course they don't, because they're all in competition with each other. So, okay, to save time, I went ahead and removed the Seymour Duncan pickup from the white Strat, and I've already went ahead and installed it in the pick guard of the black Strat. Haven't wired it in yet, so we're going to go through this. Now, there's a number of reasons I love Seymour Duncan pickups. In my opinion, they're probably the best pickup, aftermarket or stock, you can buy, for so many reasons. They're just a great company to do business with. They have a return policy. If you're not happy with the pickup, you can send it back. They'll send you a replacement. And their website is full of knowledge. And as you can see, I went on the website just now and printed out this wiring diagram, which they have wiring diagrams for any and every guitar in the world. And if you're not quite sure what pickup you need, just call them up. Call them and ask for tech support. Talk to those guys. They're tone gurus. They eat, sleep, breathe guitar tone. Tell them the sound you're looking for, and they will tell you what pickup you need, and they have never steered me wrong. So now we're going to go ahead and wire in the Seymour. So again, the white and red are already soldered together, so I'm just going to tape those off. This is important. You don't want those to contact any other wires or joints underneath the pick guard, interfering with your signal. When you're taping, you want to make it nice and neat. Don't put a huge gob of tape on there. That's one of my pet peeves. Keep it nice and tight. I'm probably using a little more than I normally would, but again, just make sure it's fully insulated so it will not touch anything else. Okay? And very simple from here. We've got a green and a bare that are already soldered together. That's the ground. And the black is hot, which is going to go right up here to the front position of the 5-way switch, which I know it sounds backwards, but the front position is actually going to be the back pickup. And that's the way these 5-way switches work. In this position, we're up here. This position, we're here. This position, we're here. This position, we're here. And then all the way back, we're here, or vice versa. Anyway, so this black lead is a little longer than I'd like it to be, because all we're going to do is put it through this little piece right here. You can see this is a bare one. It's not being used right now, and this is one we're actually going to use. There's a little gunk on there. I'm going to try to clean that up a little bit. Some residue from the old wire we took off. Okay, you should actually see a hole going through there. Still a little bit of old wire on there. And just gently kind of, once that solder's soft, and it's flowing, as they say. It's in a liquid state. You can see you could kind of push it around and manipulate it however you need to. In this case, I'm going to take some small needle nose, get these little fragments out. Still some fragments in there. This is just going to make it a lot easier for installing the new wire when you get all this junk out of the way. It's wrapped around and around in there. See, it's coming out now. Okay, now you see, pretty much got it cleaned up. That's good. Straighten it back out. You'll see that you can, there's a nice hole there to put the new wire through. Okay, now installing, soldering in the wire is a little different than unsoldering. What a lot of guys do, one of the biggest mistakes that guys do is put the solder on the soldering tip and just glob it on there, and that is not what you need to do.
What's that?
This is your solder. In this case, I'm using 44 rosin core, which means the rosin is already inside there, so we don't have to dip this in rosin like we used to do in the old days. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stick this through that hole. And kind of wrap it up around like that. Now, again, we're heating the metal, so I'm going to put the soldering tip on the post there, wait a few seconds for it to heat up, and then put the solder actually on the post. You see I'm not touching the soldering iron, just the post. And you see it start to flow, and bam. Never ever blow on it. You want to let it cool naturally. If you blow on it, you could create a cold solder joint, which will not get good conductivity, and you'll have a bad signal and the pickup won't sound right. So just let it cool naturally, kind of test it, see, yeah, it's good and strong there. Okay? Now we just have the two ground wires. Easy enough. They can go to either pot. This one's pretty crowded, so I'm going to put it back here on this pot. And again, the same thing. We're not going to solder the wire. We're going to solder where it's going. Now, because this is a pot, it's a big piece of metal, it's going to take a little while for this small spot here to heat up. But once it does, I'm going to put the solder right at the base of the tip. And you'll see it begin to flow. Okay? Get a small little puddle going there. Okay, now bring in the wires and just kind of mash them down in there, and then try to cover them up with the solder as best you can. Let it go. Do not blow on it. Again, cleaning the tip every time I finish a joint. Test it real quick. Okay, it's good and strong. This is good and strong, and that pickup's ready to go. So, good lesson to learn. Before you button it up, start screwing everything together and putting the strings on everything, test it. Always test it first, because you might have made a mistake, even though you think you did everything right. And I've learned this from experience. You might have missed something. You might have missed a ground wire. You might have a cold solder joint. You might have something that's not working right. So fire up your amp. We'll just do a quick, what we call a tap test. In the front position, the neck single coil should be on. This one's off. This one's off. One click back. These two are on. This one's still off. Middle position, this one's on. These two are off. As we go back, the bridge and the middle are on. And all the way back is just the bridge. And you can hear the difference between a single coil and a humbucker. It's heavier, it's darker, it's stronger. So, the job is done. It's done correctly. All I got to do now is put the pickguard screws back on, put the strings on it, do a good setup on it. Again, if you're not familiar with this, please take my advice and get somebody that knows what they're doing to kind of walk you through it a little more than I have. I hope this was educational for you. I hope I was able to help you get started in your guitar technician journey. And any questions you have whatsoever, please feel free to visit my website. Dave@dfwguitars.com is my email, and dfwguitars.com is the web page. Please feel free to visit and tell me your thoughts on the videos. My first one, so I'd like some feedback on that, and hopefully I'll be doing some more of this. Again, I've been doing it for over 30 years, and I've kind of stayed away from doing instructional stuff because, number one, this is how I make a living, but I'm also a big believer in karma. So I feel like if I share my knowledge with you, I don't lose it. I still got it. Now you have it, and you can pass it on to whoever. So good luck, and keep jamming.